Kong Jun stood on the balcony looking out at the sprawling city below. The hum of the city was distant, almost peaceful, but it did nothing to calm the storm in his mind. In the skies above, a strange glow was growing. Ships, massive ships, were appearing. They were not like anything he had seen before. No one knew who they were or where they had come from, but everyone knew that they were not friendly. Kong Jun was not a man to panic. As a commanding officer in the Earth's defense forces, he had seen his share of danger. But this was something different. His mind raced through possible strategies. The enemy had appeared out of nowhere, and now they were just above the clouds, casting dark shadows over the planet. No one had expected this. No one was prepared for it. The Zethra, as they were called, had arrived. The first attack was sudden. One of the alien ships launched a beam of light so bright it looked like the sun had exploded. The beam struck a city on the other side of the planet, leaving nothing but dust in its wake. It was a message, a terrifying one. The Zethra had weapons that Earth could not even dream of. The plasma beams were hot enough to melt steel, powerful enough to vaporize anything in its path. Kang Jun watched the news broadcast as images of the attack were shown. The world was in chaos. People were scared. Leaders were scrambling to come up with a plan. But Kang Jun knew that none of them were ready. No one had ever seen technology like this before. At his headquarters, Kang Jun was meeting with his top officers. There was no time to waste. The enemy was already in Earth's orbit, and they had made their intentions clear. They were here to conquer. Sir, we've received reports that the plasma weapons are tearing through our defense shields, said Captain Han, his voice tense. We're losing ground faster than we can respond. What should we do? Kang Jun looked at the screen in front of him, his hands clasped tightly together. The Zethra ships were immense floating cities in space. They looked like dark metal behemoths, surrounded by strange energy shields. The aliens were watching Earth from above, studying it, as if it were nothing more than a science experiment. We need to strike back, Kang Jun said, his voice low but firm. If they've shown us their weapons, then they're confident they can destroy us. But that means they're also vulnerable. We'll need to find a way to hit them where it hurts, fast. There was a murmur of agreement in the room. But no one had any good ideas. They had tried to communicate with the aliens, sending signals and messages, but there was no response. It was clear they were not interested in diplomacy. Yunara, a brilliant scientist and one of Kang Jun's most trusted allies, stood from her seat. She'd been quiet throughout the meeting, but now her voice cut through the air with sharp clarity. We've been researching new forms of energy weapons, and we've been testing plasma-based technology. But the Zethra's weapons are far beyond anything we've developed. We need something more. Something new? What do you suggest? Kang Jun asked, his eyes locking with hers. Ara hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowing as she thought. There's an old theory, she began slowly, a theory that suggests we could use the energy of collapsing stars. Black holes. Kang Jun raised an eyebrow. Black holes. How would that even work? Ara nodded, her eyes alight with excitement. If we could create a small black hole, we could use it as a weapon. A black hole's gravitational pull would be so strong that nothing could escape it, not even light. Imagine what it could do to their ships. We might be able to pull them apart before they even realize what's happening. The room fell silent. The idea sounded insane. But as Kang Jun listened to Ara speak, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. It was a long shot, but if anyone could make it work, it was her. We need to move quickly, Kang Jun said. Start working on it immediately. I don't care if it's 1,000 to 1 odds we have to try. As Ara and her team left to begin the research, Kang Jun stayed behind, lost in thought. The Zethra were powerful, but they were also overconfident. They thought they could crush Earth without even breaking a sweat. But Kang Jun knew better. He had seen wars before. The tide could turn with the right strategy. Kang Jun's team began their work in secret in a hidden underground facility. RA led the charge, poring over books, old research notes, and any data they had on black hole theories. It wasn't easy. There were so many unknowns. No one had ever tried to create a black hole on purpose. The idea was far beyond anything they had ever attempted before. Meanwhile, Kong Jun prepared for the worst. He organized military units, preparing them for an invasion. Earth's weapons were no match for the Zethras, but they had to be ready. Every soldier, every fighter pilot, every commander knew that the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. Days passed. The Zethra didn't attack again, but the tension was unbearable. Earth's cities remained on high alert, waiting for the next strike, but it never came. Instead, the Zethra seemed to be waiting. Watching, Kong Jun's mind raced with questions. What were the aliens planning? Was it possible that they were testing Earth's defenses? Were they preparing for something bigger? He couldn't afford to wait and find out. By the time Ara and her team made their first breakthrough, Earth was on the edge of panic. The black hole weapon was no longer just a theory, it was becoming a reality. But there were still so many risks. The technology was unstable, and no one knew what would happen when it was actually used. One night, after hours of calculations and experiments, Ara finally stood up from her desk, a broad smile crossing her face. "We've done it," she said, her voice filled with triumph. "We've created a controlled black hole. This was just the beginning." The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, dangers, and tough decisions. But for now, Kong Jun and his team could only hope that this new weapon would be enough to stand against the ZTHR. As the sun set over Earth, Kong Jun stood once more on the balcony, staring at the stars. The aliens were still out there, waiting, and Earth's survival depended on the success of a weapon that no one had ever dared to imagine. Ara sat at her desk, surrounded by scattered papers, glowing screens, and books that seemed to multiply every day. The air in the underground lab was thick with the smell of coffee and burnt wires. It was late, far later than she had intended. But she couldn't stop now. The research was too important, and time was running out. The Zethra had shown their power. They had made it clear that Earth was their next target. She wiped a hand across her forehead, pushing back a strand of hair that had fallen loose from her ponytail. Her mind raced as she reviewed the equations on the screen in front of her. The black hole theory was slowly turning into reality, but the calculations were complicated. One small mistake, and they could destroy everything. The weapon they were creating had the potential to end the Zethra's invasion. If it worked, but it could just as easily turn against them. Yoon Ra had always been confident in her work. She had spent years studying energy manipulation, quantum physics, and space-time. But this was something else entirely. Creating a black hole in a controlled environment was no small feat, and yet, against all odds, they had made progress. The device they were building was no longer just an idea on paper. It was something they could actually build and use. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. Kong Jun had told her to hurry. The Zethra were waiting, but Ra wasn't sure they were ready. There were too many unknowns. The black hole, though small in size, was still incredibly powerful. If they miscalculated even a little, it could consume everything in its path, including Earth itself. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, she leaned back in her chair, trying to clear her mind. The room was quiet except for the hum of computers and the soft tapping of her fingers against the desk. She had spent so many nights like this, thinking, calculating, doubting. But there was no turning back now. The world was counting on her. A soft knock on the door broke her concentration. Ara stood up, stretching her arms above her head, and opened the door. Kong Jun stood in the hallway, his face lined with fatigue, but his eyes sharp and focused. "Ara," he said, his voice low. "How's it going?" She stepped aside, allowing him to enter the lab. "It's going slow," she admitted. "We've made progress, but there are still so many things we need to figure out. It's not perfect yet." "I know," Kong Jun said, his eyes scanning the room. "But we don't have time to wait for perfection. We need something that works. We need something that will stop the Zethra." Ara nodded. She knew that better than anyone. The Zethra weren't just invaders. They were conquerors. They didn't care about diplomacy or negotiations. They came, They destroyed, and they moved on to the next planet. Earth was next. And unless they did something about it, it wouldn't stand a chance. "You're right," she said quietly. "But I need to be sure. I need to know that this weapon is safe to use, that it won't turn on us. I can't take the risk of creating something we can't control." Kong Jun studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "We're already risking everything, Ara. You have no other choice." She turned back to the screen, staring at the swirling calculations that filled the display. She understood what he meant, but the weight of responsibility was heavy. The device they were building could either save the world or destroy it. "We don't have much time," Kong Jun said, his voice firm. "The Zethra are already planning their next attack. We need to strike first." Ara took a deep breath. "I'll keep working on it," she said. "But we need a test. We can't just go into battle without knowing how this thing will behave." Kong Jun hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "We'll do a small-scale test," he said. "We'll use it on something that won't destroy everything." "But we need to see if it works," agreed Ara replied. "But it needs to be controlled. We can't afford any mistakes." They stood in silence for a moment, both aware of the gravity of the situation. Finally, Kong Jun spoke again. "Let's get it done, Ara. I know you can do this." With that, he turned and left the lab, leaving Ara alone with her thoughts. She knew that the weight of the world was on her shoulders, but she also knew that the people she cared about, the soldiers who fought to protect Earth, were depending on her to make this work. She looked back at the screen. There was no turning back now. The following days passed in a blur of calculations, sleepless nights, and frantic work. The small team of engineers and scientists led by RA worked tirelessly to perfect the black hole weapon. The test would happen soon, maybe too soon, but there was no choice. They needed to know if this technology could even be used in combat. Kong Jun visited the lab often, always asking for updates, always pushing them to move faster. His determination was clear, but RA could see the toll it was taking on him. The pressure of leadership, the weight of responsibility, it was wearing him down. Still, he never wavered. He never gave up. "How's the progress?" he asked one morning, looking over the team's shoulder as they worked. "We've made the adjustments," Ara replied, her voice focused but tired. "We've run the simulations. Everything looks good so far, but we still need to test it." Kong Jun nodded. "Let's do it. No more waiting." The test was set for the next day. They had chosen a small, uninhabited area of the desert for the demonstration. It was as isolated as they could get, a place where they wouldn't risk causing widespread damage. But even there, RA couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What if it didn't work? What if they had made a mistake? The day of the test, the team gathered early in the morning, their faces a mixture of excitement and fear. RA stood in front of the device, her hands shaking as she adjusted the final settings. The black hole generator was connected to a large energy reactor, its power pulsing through the machine. It looked like a giant metal sphere with cables and wires snaking out in all directions. In its center, a small core hummed with the energy of a collapsing star. "Everything's ready," Ara said, her voice steady despite the nerves that twisted in her stomach. "Let's do it," Kong Jun said. His eyes fixed on the machine, RA gave a nod and activated the system. The core of the black hole generator began to glow, brighter and brighter, until it was almost blinding. The air around the device seemed to ripple, as if reality itself was warping. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the ground shook. A small, dark sphere appeared in the center of the machine. It was barely visible to the eye, but it pulsed with unimaginable power. Ara held her breath, watching as the black hole grew. Pulling in everything around it with its intense gravitational force, the machine hummed, its energy crackling in the air. The black hole's pull was growing stronger, and Ara could feel the weight of it pressing on her chest. Kong Jun shouted, his voice tight with urgency, but it was too late. The black hole was growing too fast. The team scrambled to turn off the device, but it was out of their control. The black hole began to expand, pulling everything nearby into its depths. The air became thick with pressure, The ground trembled as if the world itself was coming apart. Era's heart raced as she fought to stabilize the machine, her fingers flying across the controls. The black hole was becoming unstable, threatening to consume everything. She knew that if they couldn't stop it, it would take them all. With a final push, she slammed her hand down on the emergency shutdown button. The black hole began to shrink, its pull weakening. The energy in the air dissipated, and the ground stopped shaking. Finally, the device powered down, and the black hole vanished. The team stood in stunned silence, staring at the empty space where the black hole had been. It had been a success, but it had also been a close call. The weapon had worked. It was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Ara wiped the sweat from her forehead, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She had never felt so relieved and terrified at the same time. The black hole weapon was real now, and it could destroy anything in its path. But it was too unpredictable. It was too dangerous, Kong. June turned to her, his face grim. "We've seen it work," he said. "Now we need to use it. The Zethra are coming." Ara nodded slowly. "I know," she said, her voice quiet. "But we need to be careful. This weapon could destroy everything, including us." Kong Jun didn't. The next few days were a blur. After the successful if terrifying test of the black hole weapon, there was no turning back. The Zethra were still out there, waiting, their ships hovering just outside Earth's orbit. Every time Aha looked up at the sky, she could almost feel their presence. The looming shadow of their power, the knowledge that they were just waiting for humanity to make a mistake. Kong Jun knew the time had come to use the weapon. The tests were over, and now they had to prepare for battle. The Zethra had shown no mercy to other planets, and Earth was next. It was a race against time. A battle not just for survival, but for the future of humanity. Era and her team had spent every waking hour making adjustments to the black hole generator. They had learned from the test, tweaking the device to make it more stable, more controlled. But even with the improvements, they were still not sure if it was ready for combat. The risk was high, and the stakes were higher, as RA worked tirelessly in the lab. Kong Jun was in constant communication with the Earth's military leaders. The enemy was moving closer. The Zethra ships were now visible in the sky, hovering over cities, casting long shadows over the Earth. The entire world held its breath, waiting for the attack. "Ready the teams," Kong Jun said to his officers. "We launch at dawn. We strike first." The words were heavy with finality. Era knew what this meant. She had spent so long trying to make the black hole weapon safe, but now she had to face the truth. There was no choice. They had to use it no matter the risks. She stood in front of the black hole generator, her hands resting lightly on the cold surface of the machine. The device hummed quietly, almost as if it were alive, a reminder of the power it held. A small black hole was nothing compared to the power of the Zetra's plasma weapons. But it could be enough to turn the tide in their favor. At least she hoped so. Yuan Ara took a deep breath and turned to her team. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "We use the weapon today. It's the only way." The engineers nodded, though their faces were filled with tension. They had all seen the power of the weapon during the test. They had all felt the weight of what it could do. But this was different. This was real, and they didn't know if it would work as intended in the chaos of battle. "Are you sure we're ready for this?" asked Kim Ji-ho, one of the engineers who had helped design the weapon. He was young, but his mind was sharp. "It's still unstable. The black hole could spiral out of control." Ara's gaze hardened. "We don't have a choice. The Zethra are coming. If we don't stop them now, we'll lose everything. We're humanity's last hope." Ji-ho swallowed hard, his face pale, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to the device. Making the final adjustments, Kong Jun entered the lab, his uniform crisp and his face set in a grim expression. He was a man used to command, but even he couldn't hide the weight of the situation. The fate of the world rested on this moment. "Is everything ready?" Kong Jun asked, his voice low but firm. Ara nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling of unease in her chest. We're ready. As ready as we can be? Kong Jun's gaze shifted to the black hole generator. He studied it for a moment, his expression unreadable. We've trained for this, he said quietly. The Zethera don't know what's coming. Let's make sure they never find out. With a final look at the team, Kong Jun left the lab, heading to the command center. The mission was about to begin, and nothing would be the same after it was over. The battle began at dawn, just as Kang Jun had ordered. Earth's forces were scattered across the globe, waiting for the signal to strike. Fighter jets roared into the air, their engines screaming as they climbed into the sky. Tanks rolled across the desert, preparing for the fight ahead. The military had one goal: to draw the Zethera into range of the black hole weapon. Era stood at the command center, watching as the battle unfolded on the screens in front of her. The Zethera ships were massive, their dark forms hovering above cities, firing their plasma beams with ruthless precision. They didn't seem to care about the damage they caused, wiping out entire cities with a single blast. There was no mercy in their attack. The human forces were outmatched. The Zethera's weapons tore through Earth's defenses like paper, and yet the humans fought on, determined to hold their ground. They had two Earth's survival depended on it. The plan was simple. Earth's forces would engage the Zethera ships and distract them long enough for Ra's team to deploy the black hole weapon. It wasn't a perfect strategy, but it was the only one they had. Kong Jun's voice came through AR's earpiece, sharp and steady. Status. Engagement is proceeding as planned, Ara replied, her eyes glued to the screen. The Zethera are focusing on the fighters. They don't seem to have noticed our ground teams yet. Good. Get ready, Kong Jun said. We're almost there. Ara turned to her team, her heart racing. The moment of truth had arrived. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had spent so many days working on this weapon, hoping that it would work. Now she would see if it would save them more, destroy them all. The black hole generator hummed, its power surging as it prepared to fire. Ara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the settings. Everything was set. All they had to do was pull the trigger. All units ready, Jiho said, his voice tight. We're locked in. Ara nodded, her mind focused. Activate. The black hole generator roared to life, a bright flash of energy filling the room. The device's core spun faster and faster, a small black dot forming in the center. The air around them seemed to bend, warping under the pressure of the energy being created. In that moment, the lab felt like it was on the edge of reality itself. Outside, the first of the Zethera ships broke through Earth's defenses. They were close now, within range. And in that moment, Ara knew it was time. Firing. She shouted with a press of a button. The weapon fired. A streak of dark energy shot out from the generator, streaking across the sky like a comet. It tore through the atmosphere, heading straight for the lead Zethera ship. The beam was small, but it carried the unimaginable power of a black hole. The Zethera ship barely had time to react. The beam struck the ship with a force that sent shockwaves through the air. The ship's energy shields flickered and then failed, unable to withstand the pull of the black hole. For a moment, the ship seemed to resist, struggling against the force, pulling it in. Then, with a sudden crack, the ship was gone, swallowed whole by the black hole. No explosion, no dramatic displage, just a swift, silent disappearance. The Zethera ship was no more. Ara stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. The weapon had worked. It had worked. But it had also left her with a sinking feeling. What had they just done? The Zethera were powerful, but they were not invincible. The black hole had shown its power, but it was also a reminder of the thin line between victory and destruction. Kong Jun's voice crackled in her earpiece. We're not done yet. Keep firing. The battle had just begun. The first Zethera ship had disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the black hole. For a moment, there was a brief silence. The battlefield paused, as if both sides were waiting to see what would happen next. Then, the realization hit. Earth had just struck the Zethera, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Era stood in front of the control panel, her fingers still hovering over the buttons. The weapon had worked, but there was no time to celebrate. The Zethra were relentless, and Earth's forces were still outmatched. But now, they had a weapon that could turn the tide. The radio crackled to life, and Kong Jun's voice came through, steady but urgent. Ara, we need more shots. The Zethra are regrouping. Ara nodded quickly, even though he couldn't see her. Understood. We L-fire again. Hold them off as long as you can. She turned back to her team. Prepare for the next shot, she ordered. We're going to need everything we have. The black hole generator hummed again, its core spinning faster. The air around it seemed to vibrate with the power building inside. Ara's heart raced, knowing that the next shot could be just as dangerous as the first. The weapon was powerful, but it was also unpredictable. They were walking a fine line, and one misstep could cost them everything. Outside, the battle raged on. Earth's forces were putting up a fierce fight, but the Zetares plasma weapons were too strong. The alien ships fired beam after beam, destroying everything in their path. Buildings crumbled to dust, and soldiers fell beneath the onslaught. But the humans didn't give up. They fought with everything they had, knowing that their survival depended on the weapon that was being prepared in this very room. Ready for the next shot? Jiho said, his voice tight with anticipation. Ara took a deep breath and gave a nod. Fire. The black hole generator powered up once again, releasing another beam of dark energy. It shot through the sky, leaving a trail of distorted light behind it. This time, the target was a larger Zetera ship, hovering just above a group of Earth's remaining ground troops. The beams struck the Zetera ship, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ship seemed to ripple, its hull warping under the force of the black hole's pull. The shields flickered, and within seconds, the ship was gone, pulled into the darkness of the black hole. There was no explosion, no dramatic crash. The ship simply vanished, as if it had never existed. Ira stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The weapon had worked again, but this time, she didn't feel the rush of triumph. All she felt was dread. They had destroyed 2 ships, yes, but the Zethero were not going to stop. They were relentless. And Earth couldn't keep up with this battle forever. The radio crackled again, this time with Kong Jun's voice, filled with urgency. They're retaliating. We need more time. We can't keep using the weapon if we can't control it. Ara turned to her team, her eyes wide. How much time do we have? Not much, Jiho replied, looking at the energy readings on the screen. The weapon's power is running low. We need to recharge before we can fire again. Ara cursed under her breath. Time was the one thing they didn't have. The Zethro were closing in, and Earth's forces were being pushed back. She could see the smoke rising from the cities on the monitors, the firestorm of destruction growing larger by the minute. The battle was slipping out of their control. We need to fall back. Kong Jun's voice came again. Tell your team to prepare for extraction. We can't hold out much longer. Ra's mind raced. They couldn't give up now. They had just started to turn the tide, but they couldn't keep firing the weapon if they didn't have the energy to do so. She thought quickly, her eyes scanning the monitors as she worked out a plan. We'll keep firing, Ara said firmly, turning to her team. We have to. We've hit them twice, but we can't let up. Not now? But the energy's low, Jiho protested. We're not going to have enough for another shot. We need to recharge. We don't have time to recharge, Ara said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. We'll make do with what we have. We fire one more shot, and then we fall back, just like Kong Jun said. The team nodded, though their faces were filled with doubt. It was a risky move, but RA was right. They had to act. The Zethro wouldn't stop, and they had no other way to fight back. We're ready, Jiho said, his voice strained. Ara took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the controls. This would be their last shot. If it worked, they could deal a serious blow to the Zethra. If it failed, they would be defenseless. Fire. The beam shot out from the black hole generator, streaking across the sky. This time, it was aimed at the largest Zethera ship, the one leading the charge against Earth. It was a huge target, but it was also the key to their survival. If they could take out the command ship, the rest of the Zethra forces might fall apart. The beam struck the ship with incredible force. The ship shuddered, its hull buckling under the pull of the black hole. For a moment, the ship resisted, its energy shields flaring as they tried to fight back against the gravitational force. But it wasn't enough. The black hole was too powerful. Slowly, the ship was pulled toward the darkness, its massive frame warping and twisting as it was consumed by the black hole. Ara watched in stunned silence as the Zethra ship disappeared into the darkness. The mission had been a success. They had taken down the largest ship in the Zethra fleet, but it was also the end of their resources. They had nothing left to fire. "That's it," Jiho said quietly. "We're out of energy." Ara's heart sank as she looked at the empty screens. The battle was far from over. The Zethra ships were still out there and they were angry. But Earth had done what they could. They had struck back and they had taken down 2 of the alien ships. But now the question was, could they survive long enough to regroup and fight again? "We fall back," Kongjun's voice came over the radio again. "Get to the extraction point. We need to regroup and figure out what to do next." Ara nodded, her mind already working. They would retreat, but they would return. They had no other choice. The Zethra had made their move, and now humanity had to make its stand. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The team quickly packed up their equipment, preparing to leave the lab. There was no time to waste. The Zethra might be weakened, but they were not finished. Earth had gained some ground, but there was still a long road ahead. The black hole weapon was powerful, but it was still unpredictable. And Earth couldn't rely on it forever as they headed toward the extraction point. Ari couldn't help but think about what they had done. The weapon had worked. They had destroyed 2 Zethra ships, taken out their leadership. But was that enough? The Zethra were ruthless, and Earth had no idea what the aliens would do next. She looked around at her team, each one of them grim-faced and tired. They had made it this far, but the war was far from over. The Zethra would be back, and Earth had to be ready. Ara sat in the makeshift command center, surrounded by screens and blinking lights. The battle was over for now, but the war was far from finished. Earth's forces had pulled back after the last strike, regrouping in a safe zone, far from the ZTHARA ships. But even in this temporary peace, there was no real rest. Everyone knew that the Zethra would come back. And when they did, Earth needed to be ready. The black hole weapon had worked, but it had come at a cost. The power source was almost drained, and the machine was fragile. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it certainly wasn't something they could use again and again. The energy required to create a small black hole was massive. Earth couldn't afford to keep using it without risking total destruction. Era stared at the screen in front of her, her mind racing with possibilities. They had won a victory, yes. But that victory was fragile. They had taken down to Zethra ships, including the flagship. But the alien race was relentless, and there was no telling how many ships they had left. Kongjun's voice came through her earpiece, steady but tinged with the weight of their situation. "Ara, we've got another problem. The Zethra are not just going to leave. We need a permanent solution. The black hole weapon can't be the answer to everything." She closed her eyes for a moment, rubbing her temples. "I know," she replied, "but we need time. The weapon is powerful, but we need to find something else, something sustainable." Kongjun's voice was firm. "We don't have that kind of time. The Zethra are already sending out reinforcements. We're still on the defensive, and we can't keep hiding behind a weapon we barely understand." Ara sighed deeply, her mind a whirlwind of calculations, theories, and what-ifs. The Zethra weren't going to stop, and neither could humanity. They had to fight back, but how? The black hole weapon had given them an edge, but it wasn't enough to turn the tide of the war. "We need to go on the offensive," she said quietly. "But we'll need more than just the black hole weapon. We need new technology, new strategies. I'm going to need more time to figure this out." Kongjun was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was low. "Time is something we don't have. Ara glanced at the screens once more, taking in the image of the Zethra ships hovering in the distance, their dark shapes like vultures circling above Earth. It was only a matter of time before they struck again. "We'll make do," she said, her voice steady. "We always do." The next few days were a blur of planning and strategy. Earth's military forces, though shaken by the recent battle, were not giving up. They couldn't afford to. Every soldier, every commander understood the stakes now. The Zethra had shown their power, but Earth had shown that it could fight back. That was something. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Ara worked tirelessly with her team, searching for ways to improve the black hole weapon. They couldn't just rely on it. The weapon was too unpredictable and it drained too much energy. She needed a way to make it safer, more efficient. The clock was ticking, and there was no room for mistakes. Meanwhile, Kung Jun was busy organizing Earth's remaining forces. They had lost a lot of ground, and there were still too many unknowns. The Zethra had powerful weapons, but they were also arrogant. They had underestimated humanity's resilience. Now Earth had a chance to prove that it wasn't going down without a fight. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew that Earth's next move would determine the outcome of the war. If they failed, they would be destroyed. If they succeeded, they might have a chance to push the Zethra back and maybe even end the invasion once and for all. Ara was exhausted, but she couldn't afford to rest. She stood in front of the black hole generator, her eyes scanning the data on the screen. The energy levels were low, and the device needed a full recharge before they could use it again. But it wasn't just about the energy. It was about control. The weapon was powerful, but they had no way of predicting how it would behave in future battles. One wrong move, and the black hole could spiral out of control. Destroying everything in its path, she had to find a way to stabilize it, to make it more predictable. The power of a black hole was immense, but it was also dangerous. If they used it too recklessly, they could wipe out entire cities, entire continents, and the entire planet. She had to figure out how to harness that power safely. "How's it looking?" Kong Jun's voice broke through her thoughts. She hadn't heard him enter the room. "It's not ready," she said, her voice heavy with frustration. "We can't just keep using it like this. We need a better plan." Kong Jun walked over to the device, his eyes scanning the readouts. "I know, but time's running out. We don't have the luxury of waiting for a perfect solution." Ara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I understand. I'm just not sure we can keep relying on the black hole weapon. It's too dangerous. There has to be another way." Kong Jun placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm and reassuring. "We're all in this together, Ara. We'll find a way." "We have to." She looked at him, her expression resolute. "I'll keep working on it," she said. "But we need to prepare for the worst. The Zethra are coming, and they won't stop until they've finished what they started." The next few days brought more chaos. The Zethra had launched a counteroffensive, sending wave after wave of ships to Earth's orbit. The humans fought back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The Zethra's plasma weapons tore through Earth's defenses, but humanity didn't give up. They fought back with everything they had, using the black hole weapon as their only advantage. But even that wasn't enough. The Zethra were too many, and the black hole weapon was too unstable to be used consistently. Ara could see the writing on the wall. Earth couldn't keep up with this fight forever. "We need to end this," Kong Jun said, his voice grim as they watched the latest wave of Zethra ships approach. "We can't keep fighting like this." Ara looked at the black hole generator, her mind racing. "We don't have the energy for another shot," she said quietly. "Even if we did, I don't know if it would work. The weapon is too unpredictable." Kong Jun's face was hard with determination. "Then we find another way. You have to." For Earth, for the first time, Ara felt the weight of their situation truly sink in. The Zethra were relentless. They would not stop. And the black hole weapon, while powerful, was not the answer to everything. She needed to think of something new. Something that could give humanity a fighting chance. "I'm not sure what else we can do," she said, her voice trembling with the enormity of the task ahead. "But we can't give up. Not now. Not when we're so close." Kong Jun nodded, his eyes filled with fire. "We'll find a way. We always do." In the days that followed, the battle for Earth raged on. The black hole weapon had given humanity a small edge, but it wasn't enough to secure victory. The Zizera were relentless, and Earth was running out of options. But Ri didn't give up. She couldn't. She knew that the fate of the planet rested on her shoulders, and she would do whatever it took to find a way to stop the invasion as the Zidara closed in. Earth's remaining forces gathered for one final stand. The black hole weapon would be used one last time, but this time it would be different. This time, Ra had a plan. The final battle was about to begin. And for the first time in a long while, Ara felt a spark of hope.